This episode of our This Week in XR podcast is sponsored by Zapper. Zapper is one of the world's leading XR companies. Over the past 12 years, they've won numerous awards for memorable campaigns. They've democratized AR by making tools and SDKs that anyone can use. And they created ZapBox, the world's most affordable mixed reality headset. Most recently, Zapper worked with Unilever to create an enhanced QR code called Accessible QR, which enables packaged goods to speak to the blind and partially sighted. If you're thinking XR, give the team at Zapper a call or visit zapper.com to see how they can help you on your XR journey. Good morning, everybody. It's December 29th, 2023. It's our last show of the year. I'm Charlie Fink with Ted Schilowitz and Roni Abovitz for This Week in XR. We don't have a lot of news this week, Chance. It's been a holiday week. Had a great time with the family. Hope you did too. I'm going to rush through this first part because I don't want to leave our great guest, Gary Shapiro, the CEO of the Consumer Technology Association, CTA, and the head of CES for many, many years now. Gary is, for 1 week a year, Gary is the most powerful man in the world of technology.
That is exactly right. Yes.
So I'm really waiting to speak with him. He's a lovely guy. I was part of Gary's book club 5 years ago. Just an extremely nice and generous man who has a very positive and nuanced view of the future. So he'll make a great guest. News this week. Oh, by the way, we usually do an end of the year show.
Yeah,
but you know, it just, you know, Gary came up as a guest and other things happened, so we didn't get to do it. But I mean, what do you think what was the biggest story of last year other than AI?
I think the rise and fall of the metaverse is maybe a good one.
Do you have any other one, Rody?
I think the Apple Vision Pro reveal in 23 was quite a news event, and it still is gripping like anticipation into 24. So it could rise, fall, rise again. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, there was an announcement this week, by the way. They're saying end of January. I did want to bring up with you, Ted. I guess I'll do it right here on the air, so to speak. But you guys are getting one of these, right?
Oh yeah, well, we will absolutely. We are, you know, I mean,
okay.
So the strangest way possible.
So once you get it, we can make an appointment for me to come to your office.
Absolutely, you can come over and hang out. Yes, of course.
Because I keep asking.
Charlie's not tried it yet, right?
No. I'm the only person who hasn't gotten COVID, and I'm the only person who hasn't gotten to try the new Apple MR device.
You will find it intriguing and fascinating in many ways.
So last week we were talking about OpenAI making a deal with German publisher Axel Springer.
Mm-hmm.
And this week the New York Times turns around and sues OpenAI.
Yeah. What do you guys think? What's your take? Roni, you know, you've got an interesting arc on this, right? So the New York Times could arguably be argued as one of the most powerful media machines on the planet, right? In terms of its life as a changeable and evolving entity that continues to be relevant and important in modern society. And this was potentially at least a minor threat to its existence, or what do you think, Roni?
Well, first of all, I know the CEO of Axel Springer, and one of the things that you could think about is that you know, these are folks that go to Sun Valley, and that's an opportunity for them to meet people like Sam Altman. So it's possible that a friendship arose and a deal arose because of that proximity through conferences like that. I'm not sure the New York Times editor-in-chief or owners go to that. So there could be like the lack of connectivity creates these sort of animosities, but I think it's a sign of things to come.
Well,
look at the bolus of training data that feeds giant AIs that they've just been scooping up as if it's their God-given right to take that data. I think you're going to see lawsuits left and right. And when you start to dismember it, it's going to be like Napster falling apart. And then you're going to have like the Spotifys that pay crazy licenses and have ownership with the people that own the copyrights. And then the whole structure is going to look different. I think we're at the beginning of the end of the Napster phase of AI. That's my take.
I think you hit upon the last piece you said is, to me, very relevant. The structure will look different. This is the early gestational days of new technology and a new way that people interface with technology, which we've seen over and over and over again. If you use the New York Times as a litmus test of evolving, an entity that has evolved and succeeded and thrived and found things like Wordle, to become a new profit center, and the way that they use online media. And if you remember and recall, the New York Times was part of, for a long time, the Apple News aggregator, and then left that aggregator to monetize on their own. So the Washington Post becomes the sort of main serious news aggregator for Apple, the Apple News feed. And if you want New York Times, you need a separate subscription to that.
There's one nuance here. There's one nuance here worth keeping in mind, which is apparently the Times and OpenAI have been negotiating for months.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a little bit like Apple holding up Facebook and Facebook saying, take a hike. And it just sounds like, I mean, this whole thing about models and the rights of people who are building these models to intellectual property is going to be resolved by the Supreme Court before the New York Times lawsuit ever builds up 5 miles per hour of momentum. So this whole thing is kind of an academic.
But Charlie, let's say the Supreme Court should uphold copyright holders' rights. You're not talking about needing to get licenses from tens of thousands of like major and minor entities and millions of individuals. Or
yeah, I don't know what the solution would be after that. And by the way, I mean the genie's kind of out of the bottle, right? Speaking of Napster, it's already been done.
Yeah, I think strategically, the folks at the New York Times that were sort of putting this together realize that if they don't take this moment, this threshold moment, to actually put up, stand up or go home kind of thing, that it'll be too far gone and they won't be able to technically or sort of like, within the kind of zeitgeist of what the world wants in their understanding of who owns what. So it's kind of like they've got to make their stand at this point in time and represent so that they can negotiate something as opposed to
my AI company is in Singapore. What are you going to do?
You won't be allowed to bring it to the United States. I mean, yeah, you could steal IP and patents. No, like I mean, look, the US is gonna have to figure something out. Do copyrights, trademarks, and patents have value? And if not, you're dismembering the last 200 years of our economy.
Right.
You either protect the Western value of IP, copyright, trademark, or you don't. But if you don't, you are throwing the entire system that's been built over hundreds of years. You can argue that maybe is a good thing, but like, is it something that this country wants to do or not? It's a very fundamental question.
Yes, I agree. All right, let's bring in Gary. We didn't make him wait more than 2 minutes. That's better than our average.
We're excited to talk to him. It'll be an interesting conversation, especially within just a few days of CES. Which
I know. Well, isn't that great? And we're so like, it's in the air. I mean, it's every email I get is about CES this week. Hi, Brian.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. We're recording and just waiting for Gary.
Hi, everyone. This is Patrick with the CTA comms team. Apologies if this wasn't relayed. We're dealing with time differences. I'm actually in the UK right now as well. Unfortunately, Gary has a conflict. Gary Comisky is... So Ryan is going to be taking place for Gary today as part of our research team and Futurist in-house. I apologize that wasn't communicated.
No, this is actually the first time we're hearing about it, but hi, Brian.
Hi, how's it going?
And you're live. Say hi to our audience.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, this will make the most original transition to our guest segment in 2023, but welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. Happy to be here.
So tell us what you do and our listeners, what you do for CTA. So
Yeah,
we'll start there.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, like why am I here? So I'm the director of thematic programs and Futurist here at CTA. So I work in our research department. Primarily, I work in partnership with NASDAQ to develop thematic stock indexes that track specific technology themes. So if you've ever invested in a sector ETF in technology, the indexes behind it are oftentimes NASDAQ CTA indexes. But then my other part of my role is to track the trends that we're going to see at CES and how they'll unfold and shape not just the year ahead, but the next decade and beyond. So really just kind of trying to keep an eye on to tomorrow more than anything.
All right, so Brian, you're going to make a great guest. We don't need Gary. We got you. You're going to be better.
Well, I will do my best. I will do my best.
Well, just because, living under the covers in something that, for us that sort of live inside the world of the FANG companies and all the associated sort of both good, bad, and mess of all that, and how they've risen to such a huge part of many people's investment ideals and investment strategies, both the large fintech companies as well as individual investors. That's an interesting role that you have, working on sort of delivering the research to all of those groups that then will make decisions based on that research. So you have a sort of an ominous responsibility, right?
Yeah. I mean, so it's nice to only have to be responsible for the qualitative side of the research, right? NASDAQ, being a partner, handles the quantitative and the measures when developing that index. But yeah, I mean, we have about $10 billion in assets under management in the funds that track our indexes, and they're global too, right? So we're not just looking at NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange listed companies. We're looking at global companies and keeping an eye on the space, especially like sometimes with an index, you have to require 50% of your revenue has to come from the space itself. So think about that in the context of maybe like cloud, right? That if that's a requirement, that means Amazon, Microsoft, not in the index because they don't get half the revenue from the cloud. So you have to start looking at the other players in the space that might make it up. Mind you, our cloud index does include those companies. We don't have that threshold.
And this is a profit center for the CTA, because CTA is a nonprofit entity overall, right? But you use this to cover costs and make it manageable and viable. Am I correct about that?
So we're not for profit. This is a licensing agreement. So think about it this way, where NASDAQ is the one who licenses out the indexes to the exchange traded or mutual funds. We receive essentially a revenue share of that, almost as if like a consulting fee in this regard. And so, yeah, it does well. I would say that CES is by far and large what drives revenue at CES or CTA, I should say.
This is a small little vertical of that, but
it's another vertical.
So Brian, this is my 32nd CES. So I've seen some trends come and go. We talk about them on the show all the time. One of them, of course, we were just opining a bit, looking back instead of looking forward. Ted and I like to say we're not futurists, we're pastists. Mm-hmm. So before we project out toward 2024, let's take do you mind taking a quick look back at 2023? So in January 2023, you could not stop by a booth at CES and not hear the word metaverse. Everything at CES was, it's a tractor and it's connected to the metaverse. So this year it's inevitable, of course, we already know based on the just press bombing that people like us get, that this is the year of AI, right? You're not going to be, people were mentioning AI last year, but this year every product we see, just like the consumer electronics show became the consumer everything show, I think we're about to see the AI everything show. But looking back, so we had the metaverse, I guess we had IoT before that. There was VR before that. I don't know how long you've been doing this, but can we look back a little bit, both on 2023 and maybe a little farther back? Just for
of course. Yeah, no, I think that's really important to establish the concept, because what you're getting at in many ways is hype cycles at the end of the day. So just for full context, my first CES in person was CES 2020, actually, like right before the pandemic started. And I had been tracking as a media analyst, actually, CES space. So I'm familiar with it for the past probably decade or so. Mm-hmm. But yeah, last year, everything was the metaverse. And I think a lot of that was, right, like this is the perfect example of the hype cycle, right? It was hitting the massive fever pitch before. Companies are certainly going to try and see are we applicable to it, right? But then, like anything in a hype cycle, you enter, what's the phrase from Gartner, the trough of disillusionment a little bit. And so how do you respond to that? And I'm going to stay in the metaverse for a second, but I'm happy to dive into some of the other ones. But when you think about it, right, the metaverse is now, it's not that it's gone away. The innovation's still happening, but it's about defining those use cases, right? Because if you think about tech advancement as like a balancing act, think about like pairs of forces between consumers and enterprise. One is value for consumers, right? They want the best value out of anything. Enterprises want growth, right? That's what they want from their technology. Then you have demand from consumers. You have productivity to meet it. Then there's the last pair of forces, right? Which is necessity versus innovation. So you had a lot of innovation for enterprise, but not necessarily a consumer, by the way, doesn't have to be an individual. It could be a business too, right? Because there's a lot of B2B. Necessity is on their side of it, right? So a lot of what's going on here is this sort of innovation getting a little bit ahead of how you do find the necessity. Tech advancement best occurs when you have a balance. And so now, 2023, you did see the flashes of what you'll see at 2024 with the metaverses, which is enterprise use case, right? So Magic Leap, really good example last year, right? Talking about the Magic Leap 2 and the use of...
Never heard of the company.
I know, right? Never heard of the company. I swear I'm not brown nosing. But in this case, right, it's defining and using it for operating rooms remotely, right? For remote surgery. This year, we're going to see a lot of the digital twin technology focused on industrial metaverse applications from Siemens, right? So looking at how to use on factory floors. Dassault is going to showcase a living heart, which is a R&D focused on advancing research for heart disease, right? So in that many ways, right, that's where you're starting to see, okay, we're looking at a necessity and we're innovating to meet it. That's, I would say, the metaverse story. You could apply that same sort of balancing act, though, to IoT, to VR. It's all about where are you getting these necessities and how is that innovation occurring? And it's a story of balance. And I think AI is going to fit into that certainly this year. It's going to be
Brent, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Because some of the whole, especially with you as an analyst, all the discussion around all this stuff is how you define things. So how do you define metaverse? Because I define it in a particular way that I think gets lost. But what's your definition of it? It'd be interesting to see, like, because you talk about metaverse separate from AI, separate from VR, separate from IoT. But what is it to you?
So I don't think they're separate. I guess I should be clear on that. I don't think, to be honest, I don't think innovation occurs in silos. Advancement in any technology has to drag or bring along or push the other one, right? So for me, I guess that's the question. From the metaverse side, I do think of it as, in a lot of ways, the next generation of what we would call the internet now, which is taking it to its spatial component where you're going beyond immersive audio and visual. But the key component in my mind is you're also creating immersive touch and bringing in all the other senses along with it. That, to me, is a successful metaverse. Or at least that's the end state. But technology innovation, right, is two paths. It's revolutionary or evolutionary, right? Those revolutionary breakthroughs like igniting fusion in the last year, right? That's pretty revolutionary because it launches a field forward. I think the metaverse is going to fall into the evolutionary, which is those iterative cycles where you build and you incrementally improve to get to the end state, which is how I would define it there. I'm curious what you define as the metaverse, right? Because this would be the ultimate question.
Well, let me. I want to throw a little levity into this, and then go into something sort of serious that relates.
At the end of the year, we need to have some fun, right?
I want to have a little levity here, and then move it into something that.
Let's not seriously though go down this rabbit hole of defining the metaverse because.
No, but here's a good little piece of CES levity that I think you guys will enjoy, and then we're going to ask a serious question that I think, Brian, I'm very curious how you relate to this. So I have a test, like a Turing test of when something in the world of that shows up at CES has jumped the shark, and if I see three categories that associate with this term, I know it's over. Basically, it's my frying pan, toilet, hairdryer test. And if I see a frying pan that is the frying pan of the metaverse, a toilet that is the toilet of the metaverse, and a hairdryer that is the hairdryer of the metaverse, I know it's over. Last year at CES, guarantee you there were those three things there because we were there, right? This year, it's going to be interesting to see what the test is for AI. What are the three most ridiculous things? And it's probably going to be a frying pan, a toilet, and a hairdryer.
It's a rice cooker.
Rice cooker is another good one. Yeah. All right, let's let Brian comment on that because there's actually a serious theme under that I think is important. But it's just fun to have a little, because CES is actually a joyous, fun time to experience what people are thinking about and how they're moving consumer goods, consumer durables into the world of technology, right? Which is different than a lot of other shows and a lot of other conferences. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to have you comment on.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm glad you mentioned joyous because that, first off, that's how I have always viewed CES. Like for me, like growing up, like when I think about technology, I associate with things like Epcot. I associate it with even like the World's Fair of Chicago when you learn about it, right? Like Zipper was invented there, right? And then I think about like the science fiction elements, like the Stark Expo. So to me, like that's like in real life what I get to go do it like every year, which is fun. But I guess you're getting to the point, which is like you're seeing where there's this idealistic belief in, well, how can we use the technology trends and themes of the day to underpin even the smallest of innovation or in the most unexpected ways, right?
Mhm.
So in this case, the toilet, the frying pan. We have seen smart toilets. That was a thing that was last year. And it made sense because a lot of it is, well, a lot of your health is determined by your gut. And so having maybe AI on board to assess what is going on in that case could actually help you improve your diet.
I
Considering
generally know, but okay.
Yeah.
But that's a great perspective that you're taking something that seems farcical and you're actually making the point that technology sort of bleeds into what we do as humans all the time. And if you look at like the perfect technological outcome of that, you look at the Toto toilets from Japan, they are technological marvels, right? That absolutely show up at CES every year with the next new thing with 85 different buttons and it's $24,000 and there's a market for that, right? And
it's incredible. Yeah.
It's incredible, right? Well, there's an amazing South Park episode, by the way, of the Japanese Toto toilet. If you've never watched it, for our listeners, it's fantastic. And I love the fact that you mentioned Epcot, because for the listeners that don't know, Epcot stands for Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. It was Disney's vision to build a society, like a utopia. And of course, after he passed, it turned into another theme park, which was commercially viable. But CES is, you're right, I never really thought of it in those terms, but it does a lot like Epcot and the World's Fair and the relation to how we learn about new things.
I think the World's Fair is a really good way to characterize it. The other thing is, and I mean, and CES has developed, this whole country pavilion theme over in Eureka Park, which was a really smart thing they did about 5 or 10 years ago. And it makes it easier for me as a writer to see what's going on. So that was thoughtful, and that's one of the good things. CES is, CTA has been doing this for a long time. They are very, very good at putting on the world's biggest trade show. I will say this: you do get a good feel, as you said, Ted, for what's coming this year, right? Generally, what you see, if it's new, it's going to be a Q4 2024 product. Right. These are not things that we talk about that are here tomorrow. But you remember I did this whole thing on smart glasses becoming phone accessories, low-cost phone accessories. We saw that at the show en masse, right? But probably 10 companies exhibiting the same concept or application of the technology. And lo and behold, every story in XR for the past 12 weeks or 10 weeks, 8 weeks has been about these low-cost wearable screen reflectors that view XR and the wearable as an accessory that you use for media consumption, and then you remove it. Right? It's not an all-day, everyday thing. It's I'm in a cafe and I'd rather play a game on what appears to be a big screen than in a 6-inch screen in my hands.
Yeah, so, CES often, see if you agree with this, Brian, gives us a little bit of insight as to what consumers will actually adopt as a category, will actually start to look at and potentially buy in their local consumer electronics store or their local big box store or online.
Yeah, so what is that for 2024? That's what we want to know.
Yeah, and I guess it's the bellwether, right, of what we're going to see. And let's actually let's go with an example that I think is relevant to what you're talking about in smart glasses, but also brings in the AI portion, right? So at CES in North Hall, you'll find EssilorLuxottica. They are the Italian group that owns
the
Ray-Ban,
the Meta partner.
And so we would expect to see the Ray-Ban Meta there to talk about AI on board in your smart glasses, right? Because what makes AI powerful, and the reason why maybe a little bit where everyone was trying to latch onto the metaverse being a little bit more of a difficult play is metaverse in a lot of ways, while integrated to a lot of other technologies, is kind of almost like a vertical, right? You are to a degree going top to down in terms of a value chain of the technologies and hardwares. AI is what I would call horizontal, right? Where the whole premise is it's supposed to cut across every industry vertical to make it more efficient. And this is where you're getting a combination of, well, if Ray-Ban is getting involved, it's onboarding the AI features, but what's the other portion of this? It's a stylish and chic form factor that looks nice. And they're not just doing it with AI glasses. Another important trend I think is going to be big this year is what me and my colleagues would deem inclusive tech design. And a really good way to think about it is they're going to be, EssilorLuxottica just made an acquisition of Nuance Audio. That's hearable solutions that you can put into stylish glasses that offer discretion if people want it, but also increases the market in terms of hearing assistance, right? And that's going to be a technology design that permeates across the show floor as well. We're already seeing things like wheelchair modes on Garmin smartwatches now, because before you couldn't track steps or cardio if you were in a wheelchair, right? It's thinking about addition more than anything and not subtraction from the market. So when I think about that, that's the type of stuff that I'm watching for, is what are those trends that cut across every single category this year? And it's going to be, we're looking at a more intelligent tomorrow, a greener tomorrow, and a more inclusive tomorrow is how I'd say what you're going to see on the show floor.
Roni, I've got a couple of, Brian pulls on some interesting threads that'll lead us down a more serious topic, but I want to give you a chance to go down some of the questions you might have, Roni, before I do that.
Brian, could you just double click on the inclusive? Is that sort of like the wheelchair example? Is that what you're thinking?
Not just that though. Like, so we're going to see, so yes, certainly, yes. But like at Eureka Park, for example, we're going to see a company that is focused on an app that allows women to walk home safely in cities, right? It's designed by women for women. Or another good example is there's a software as a service talent acquisition platform that's going to be at CES. That's whole goal is to try and increase underrepresented communities in the working profile, one of them being informally incarcerated individuals, right? So thinking about how do you add on and build more into your market, and or how do you use tech really to make sure no one's left behind in that regard? So that's sort of what we're getting at. It's beyond accessibility, right? Because I think when you go to like wheelchair applications, you think accessibility, but it's a little bit more not just about who's using the technology oftentimes, but it's a question of who's developing it too, and how are they developing it to reflect themselves a bit more, or to reflect a larger pool of people that would use it.
Interesting.
So I've been reading a lot with regard to the upcoming show about developments in displays, wireless TVs, foldable screens, foldable TV screens. So I'd like to hear your perspective on that category and whether that stuff has got real utility for consumers. And then, what are the other categories in addition to screens that are going to make a lot of noise?
Yeah, of course. So in this case, right, we do know that there's been kind of the teasing of a lot of concepts of foldable screens. I think TCL and C-Speed are two brands that are C-Seed, have been talking about the foldable form factor screen, right? And so I guess this is more the idea of like flexible viewing environments speaking to it. But I think the larger theme in displays is actually what is kind of, pun intended, is we're moving from like high definition to redefinition in a lot of ways, where the home TV is really starting to, I think, get into this place of as the intelligent home hub or the command center, right? So Displace, who brought the wireless TV last year, this year they're bringing new wireless TVs with landing gear to prevent it from falling. But the thing that they are really bringing that's driving the space forward is they're going to have AI onboard shopping and e-commerce and payments systems on board, as well as thermal cameras to conduct telehealth appointments, right, from your TV. So adding more features, because when you think about it, right, the penetration rate in the US household for a TV now has just slipped behind the smartphone, but it's still over 90%, right? What would make more sense to have a connectivity of all these features of intelligence in your house than the place that you're already gathering around as a family oftentimes, right? So that's, I think, what is going to happen in display more.
I thought that was an interesting point. You mentioned sensors indirectly. Mm-hmm. This is, of course, what Meta has done. They've always had this stupid camera that nobody uses and takes terrible pictures that is a pain in the ass to get onto your phone and onto the app. But they've actually found a newer, better use for it, which is as a sensor. Mm-hmm. And for AI to work, of course, it has to have some spatial understanding of where you are and what time of day it is, and all of the kind of obvious parameters of the wearer at that given moment. So, do you think there are other ways sensors? So you mentioned sensors getting embedded in televisions. Where else I think there's a company actually also called Meta that is putting some kind of sensors in fabrics?
Yes, that's correct. So yeah, sensors and fabric. So that's like, we've seen this at the show. I'm trying to think of who is going to exhibit in this case. but I have seen
Adobe,
over the
right?
years
They have a project with a dress that is all censored.
intelligent clothing. That is a huge thing. Especially we've seen it. And where did it start? Actually, at CES is in the last few years we've seen it. It started in the accessibility space, right? Especially for keeping on board for
Yes.
remote patient monitoring, for fall detection. So I'm sure we'll see the continuation of that. The other place, to be honest, where I think about sensors, like my mind immediately goes, is the fact that, like, you know, we're one of the largest auto shows, but we're arguably the largest mobility show, right? Because we're not just cars, we are flying taxis, we are boats. But when you think about where sensors are going to be, you're going to have companies like Luminar, Mobileye that are showcasing the advancement, right? This is that evolutionary iterative cycle of, well, how do you push forward sensors for autonomous mobility, right? And so that's where I think, when I think about the sensor story, that's the place where I like to go to. I'm also looking at what the semi play is going to be like in relation to that too. And so NXP will be in Central Plaza for the first time. I'm curious to see what they're talking about. And same with Qualcomm and Intel. They're going to make AI hardware a massive focus and the sensors behind it in their keynotes, as well as when they're discussing with in their exhibits.
Okay, so let's go down a somewhat daunting task for you, which I'll be very interested to see how you think about this as an organization, how you work through this as an organization. The way I look at the evolution of this trade show and many trade shows is there are companies that have built success using certain trade shows. And very often these companies get very, very large, very, very important in and of themselves. Let's call them self-important. And then they choose to ignore those trade shows that in many ways have helped them get there. So if you look at, and this maybe goes
look at
back to your
Microsoft,
business.
look
Yes.
at Google.
Well, if you look at
Apple doesn't go to CES, really.
correct. So you guys are dancing down the right dance here, right? So if you look at the largest companies on the planet, the largest company on planet Earth, arguably the most successful company on planet Earth, they left the idea of the CES trade show many moons ago. Now their ecosystem exists in mass at CES. All the secondary, tertiary, you know,
And their execs are all over the place.
Yes. So the ins and the outs, right? Apple is largely out. As I remember for years past, and I think I'm 25 years CES, not quite as much as Charlie, Google has largely been in outside. They have kind of almost a theme park sort of, talk about Epcot, theme park sort of presence at CES.
It's branding, but they often, like Amazon, or at least in the past, had a side room for their hardware.
Yeah. So, okay. So you get the question, right? I mean, what is CES's take on these large FANG companies, multi-trillion-dollar valuation companies, and how they use and maybe abuse CES and the CTA? And do you find that you have to navigate that constantly?
So just to
leave you behind, do you leave them behind?
Just to be clear to the listeners, what Ted is saying is companies like Microsoft build up their brand at CES for 10 years, then they start their own developer conference and they say, well, we really don't need CES anymore. And often these are very, very high dollar clients.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, that's the ultimate question, I think, in the tech event space in general. I think you see this across the board with any trade show. Gaming is another one that comes to mind.
We saw E3 has gone away now, right? Because completely packed up their tent and gone, which was a huge, huge trade show in Los Angeles for many, many years.
Yeah, and so I think about it this way. So yeah, Google is there, Amazon and Microsoft all have presences in different fashions, right? Amazon has presences in 3 different ways: an auto, a business, and then that side, right?
Well, they have a hardware business.
Exactly. And they cater themselves in a lot of ways to what they think that they're going to get their business done. Because that's really the utility still of CES in a lot of ways, is that the average executive has around 27 meetings in those 4 days, right? So it's where business gets done. So that's your first utility there. But when you think about it, we're at about 4,000 companies are expected, or for 4,000 exhibitors are expected at CES. And so even if you have some of these larger companies that say, hey, we're going to do our own announcements independent of one another's, in my mind, that creates the utility of those smaller companies, especially 1,200 of them are startups. And Eureka Park, which we've been talking about with the international pavilions, that is a pretty strong place where you can say, well, now we have a larger degree of movement to make some of our announcements that can maybe catch fire and get some pretty amazing coverage, or some of the deals that we need. I know Shark Tank's going to be at CES, for example, and they'll be walking that portion of the show floor. That's a lot of room for them to run in there.
Oh, yeah.
So I guess that's where, when I think about when you have the challenge, it's always a dance. And I'm in the research side. I'll be very clear. I don't weigh in on those decisions in the long-term strategy, but as an analyst in the space, it's something that everyone thinks about. But those companies still come. And as Charlie pointed out, those executives are still coming in the background because that's where they can go and find the deals.
Well, let's talk about Eureka Park for a second, because I think that is our, certainly for me, that is my specific reason to go to CES. All the big stuff I kind of know, right? And it's fun to go and see all the big TVs and all the well sort of laid out, very classy and overblown budgets of big companies demonstrating their consumer products wares. But the real action is kind of what I would refer to as the flea market of CES, is Eureka Park, because these are companies that have very little funding, right? So it feels like a flea market, like you're packed in there. They're all in little 8x10 booths, most of them. Some have little larger booths, but there's not a lot of frills. There's not a lot of fluff. They're really getting down to the action, and it is usually packed. Like, it is wall to wall with people.
In 2020, you could not walk through there.
Yeah, it is.
2020 was a crazy year, right? There was over 150,000 people there. I think even last year, because of the pandemic, international was down. But it looks like, based again just on a sample I get by email, it looks like it's going to be back this year, probably way bigger than last year.
Yeah, I'll interject really quick too, right? So it was around 172,000. My first CES 2020. Right?
I mean, that was sick.
Yeah. So last year we had about 100. I think it was, after auditing, it was over 115,000. I want to say closer to 18. This year we're tracking for, and obviously we'll know because we audit, right? That's a big part of what we do. We have an independent auditing company say this is the attendance. We're tracking for 130,000 attendees right now, right?
Jesus
so we
Christ.
are. Yeah, we're coming back. We're back. I guess it's not we're coming back. We're back. And Eureka Park is. I'm glad you guys all enjoy as much as I do. Is what it sounds like too. Because for me, we've mentioned it before. That's the spirit of Epcot. When I saw the international pavilions, that's immediately what it evoked for me. It's very. There is something that is inherently. You call yourself pastist, and I think I actually really like that, because there's something inherently nostalgic about looking to the future, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what you get in this area. And so, to kind of describe to folks, you got the international pavilions, you got a lot of U.S. government agencies as well there, or U.S. or international universities. And so really, a third of our attendees at CES are from outside the United States. And so this is really where you're seeing this international exchange of ideas. And that's where you're going to run the gamut, right? You will see things like, I know for a fact we're going to see AI solutions that analyze your healthcare records to reduce the amount of detection time of risk of infection after surgery, right? That's one. You're going to see, I know there's a concept that's going to be there that's converting sound waves into electrical energy, right? So it's everything. We talk about, where it's the consumer everything show and more things. It's not just the consumer part though. There's the enterprise solutions, and that's a huge part of it. I know in those big booths, though, at the convention center, companies like LG and Samsung are going to be unveiling, or especially LG, I think, pretty significant advancements that pair in the enterprise side, right?
Yeah, there's always a few big companies that surprise us and show us, but in the Eureka Park world, I assume Charlie and Roni will too. We gravitate toward, for me, I gravitate toward the Israel Pavilion, because there are so many Israeli innovations. It's sort of mind-boggling how many things come out of that small little strip of desert in the Middle East that have literally changed the world over and over again. And that's just one. Japan is another one that sort of brings massive amount of innovations and have this interesting kind of culturally relevant presence. But Israel in particular is kind of a remarkable CES success story of things
I think
that they've shown.
you could also look to Korea in that context.
Absolutely.
I know they have a big pavilion this year, and it sounds like they actually have a lot of innovation that is relevant to our category of XR and AI.
Certainly, yeah. In that case, when we're thinking about it, in kind of this overall theme. Like Korea is a major one. The Netherlands and France too. Not to
Yes.
forget, they have a significant presence.
Ryan, what about China? Like China proper?
Oh, good
Has
question.
its
I was thinking
presence,
about this too.
Yeah, what? Because there's a weirdness between China and the West, and like, have you seen a decline or the same number of Chinese companies in governmental presence at CES? Because I mean, there's such a key player in-
2020, there was a lot, and then the past few years, not so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think we still see a significant amount of Chinese companies that are exhibiting on the show floor. I know Alibaba is going to be in the North also. We're going to have some of those giants out of there too, in a lot of ways. I ultimately, right, regardless, innovation happens everywhere in the world. And it results from the conditions in which it arises from each individual nation. So and that way, right, that's what CES is a platform for in general. It's companies who have this innovation are ready to come there. So China will have a presence there because they are innovating and they are pioneering in a lot of ways. But to Ted's point, you have countries like Israel, and we'll have Ukraine there too, with showcasing innovation. So in a lot of ways, Korea has, when I think about like the largest presence, I think it's Korea now that has surged into having the largest from an international presence. And that also makes sense, not just from a tech innovation standpoint, but I'd be remiss when we talked about TV if I didn't talk about content evolution too in general, right? Because we have C-Space. We've talked about the Venetian Expo and we've talked about the convention center, but there's a whole other show floor in the Aria and Cosmo that's focused on content and marketing. In Korea, in terms of the power of K-pop, in terms of Korean language cinema, is a huge presence of that. To be frank, we just are more multilingual, or at least pushing for universal libraries that are more international. Netflix is coming back to the show floor actually in Central Hall, and it's to do an immersive experience. So they're trying to do that immersive experience around The Three Body Problem, which was a Chinese novel, right? Before it became adapted. So in a lot of ways, it's this diffusion of the cultural element too across the board, because I think it's recognizing that we're in a much more pluralistic and diverse society.
Yeah.
That is a great point and a great way for us to end the show. Thank you, Brian, for coming and help sharing with us some philosophies and some observations and some nuances about CES. We'll be talking about it more next week. But for now, that is our show, everyone. Have a great week, and we'll see you in Las Vegas.